Well, welcome everyone to today's webinar as part of the Next Innovation series. Today's topic is how to successfully engage HCPs virtually. My name is Angela Labrozzi. I'm the Channel Partner Director for Within3, and I'm grateful to be joined today by my fellow panelists, Christine Canevari and Neil Malloy. Christine, Neil, I'd love for you both to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. Thanks so much for having us. I'm Christine, and I'm with Innovative BioPharma. We're a medical industry marketing and communications firm, and we work with global pharma and med device companies. And I've been working with this company for about 3 or 4 years now, and I'm an account manager, so I work with 3 or 4 different clients. In a variety of areas, rare disease and lipids, and the cardiovascular space.
Great,
awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christine. Neil Malloy with Summit Global Health. Thanks so much, everyone, for being here today. Summit is a Simpson Healthcare company, a scientific agency focused on building health through collaboration with experts, and virtual engagement is a really big part of that. So I lead the Summit team. I've been with the company since 2004. Prior to that, my background was in population sciences, public health, and some oncology research at Dana-Farber and also Mass General Hospital. So looking forward to this panel discussion today, and really thrilled to have Christine here as well.
Great, thank you both. So for today's discussion, I'd like to start off by talking about exactly what is virtual engagement, because I think we're all hearing that phrase tossed around. And as I mentioned, I work for Within3, which is a software company focused on healthcare. And we look for places within the life science industry where communication is expensive, complicated, or time consuming. And so we've built a technology solution to overcome these challenges. And so in today's world, we're all remote and we're all engaging in ways both personally and professionally like we've never had before. And so as marketers, we need to decide which tools make the most sense to implement based on our clients' needs and objectives. And so when we think about educating and communicating with HCPs, we no longer can rely on the tried and true personal interactions through our MSLs and sales reps and through live meetings. And so now we've shifted towards webcasts and webinars and interactive forums. And so it's causing us to really reflect and look at, different success metrics. And so a lot of us now are looking at online discussions and over time asynchronous sessions. And so I'd like to define over time asynchronous when we're talking about it in the sense when we are speaking to HCPs. And the goal of this is for us to overcome some of those challenges in terms of different time zones or different languages, and then even looking at travel restrictions that we now have, or even in the past that may have caused us problems in coordinating these types of meetings. So for today's discussion, we're going to look at how these different types of virtual tools can help overcome these challenges and allow our clients to collect the data and feedback that they need in so many cases when they're developing a drug or device along the product life cycle, from clinical, medical affairs, and commercial. So I'd like to dive into our discussion. Neil, Christine, I would love to have you share, some case studies and examples where it's been beneficial to you to utilize these virtual tools, perhaps even in an overtime setting.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I can start if you'd like. So we've been fortunate to have been working with a client who was already a partner of Within3, so it was a very quick transition at the start of the pandemic, and of course the pandemic is such a hot topic, but it's become so, what we've had to do in these times has become such a bigger issue now, moving forward into what the future will look like, as we've heard in earlier discussions during the Innovation Week. But in our case, we had a cookie cutter series of advisory boards, and When we moved over to the online platform, we were able to compare the first few asynchronous. They were hybrid, so they had a portion of a live meeting with them, and then we moved it over to the asynchronous platform for a 2-week discussion period. And when we did that, we were able to compare those online virtual meetings to the in-person ones that we had done, and we took an average of those engagements, the advisor engagements. We were able to actually see 3 times the engagement with using the online virtual platform as we were in the live sessions, in the live meetings. And by engagement, I mean, you know, a response to a question, an advisor comment, discussion back and forth between 2 advisors. So each engagement being a comment, a question, or a point made during the meeting. And so 3 times the number of engagements using the virtual platform. And it was it's a pretty impressive number. And then on top of that, we actually compared the budgets. And we were looking at around a 45 to 50% reduction in budget to hold the same exact type of meeting. So a half-day advisory board in person compared to around a 2-week online asynchronous plus live discussion meeting was able to be about a 3 times increase. So it's a pretty great model.
That's terrific.
That's great. So I've got a few quick examples that I'll share that I think represent really the spectrum of utility of the platform, which is terrific. Because I've had the chance to work with Within3, utilize the platform and customize it for a number of client needs over the years. And again, being based in scientific communications, it's all about gaining insights and gathering recommendations to solve problems for the client. So one of my first really positive experiences was actually on the clinical team, which maybe doesn't always come to mind when you first think about virtual engagement. But what we were tasked with was clinical trial design, some adaptive clinical trial design that was pretty complex, was going to take a large group of experts that were multidisciplinary, and something that really, even if we had access to as many live ad boards as possible, wasn't so easy to solve in that setting because of cost and just because of the time that it takes to implement that. So we utilized the Within3 platform over a series of months, and it was very, very effective for gathering various evolutions of this trial design, gaining feedback from internal stakeholders, both US and global, and really taking this all the way through to finalization and actually implementation of the clinical trial. So that was really very, very successful for the client. The second example was in medical affairs, and for a large summit. You know, Christine mentioned COVID. This actually happened to be in the early March timeframe, which, as you'll remember, that's when COVID was really spiking and everything was closing up. So we had a large advisory board, actually of over 40 experts, that was gathered. You know, all the logistics in place, flights booked, etc. And we needed to shift this at the last minute. And so we utilized a combination of live, virtual, and then the Within3 platform to have really, you know, a overall presentation to the main group, and then break people out into different Within3 sessions, you know, based on their specialty, their background, what they were interested in, and some of the recommendations that came out of the live portion of the meeting. And that was very successful and ran over the course, you know, just up until recently. So for about 6 months. This ran. It was successful, and in terms of some of those metrics in place, you know, the budget overall ROI was much better in terms of spend. The insights gained were very substantial. I really like the ability of the platform to tie feedback, you know, to each individual user and be able to quantify that through both qualitative and quantitative questions. That was very successful for the client. Sometimes it's not as easy to do that in a live in-person advisory board when there's just open discussion. And I think importantly, the HCP experience was really, really positive. They all were able to get into the platform easily, and all the feedback was very strong. And so the last example I want to share really kind of is the opposite end of that spectrum from the clinical side. And this was a patient ad board, actually a couple that we've done even very recently that have been quite successful. And I found it to be a little bit more of a comfortable format to deliver a patient ad board. Sometimes it's not easy to fly patients and contract them and have exchange of value for all the obvious logistical reasons. So the platform has also been very successful for having a, kind of a secure, private session with patients to understand sort of their journey, their diagnostic experience, and gather recommendations for the brand. So, these have all been really successful case studies for me and the Summit team.
That's fantastic. Those are great examples. Thank you for sharing both of those. And you both touched upon a number of points I'd like to discuss, but just sticking with the hybrid approach, because it sounds like you've both had success there. So knowing that, I think a lot of people tuning in are both from client on the pharma side as well as other agency representatives. Are there any best practices or trends you're seeing as you're planning for 2021? Utilizing not only just the overtime, but that hybrid approach of mixing the live and the asynchronous?
Yeah, we're seeing that starting out any session with a live presentation, video conference is really beneficial to the overall camaraderie amongst the advisors, especially in a setting where they may not be familiar with one another. A lot of times you'll see advisory boards where they do all know each other. They've been working together for years, depending on the level of, KOL. But we've found that when they don't necessarily know each other, it's a really great way to just kind of break the ice, get them comfortable with each other, so that when they do move over to the online platform, they're more likely to engage with one another because they've already heard a little bit about one another. They've gotten, the comfort level has been set. So that's one thing that we've really started to make sure we implement with each of our meetings.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, same here, Christine. I think it's important to have that live company presence and communication out to your advisors. Usually there's some type of content that you need to level set on. In our case, it's often reviewing pipeline information, maybe drugs in development or clinical trials that are ongoing now, and some sort of baseline that you need to set from a knowledge standpoint in order to have that conversation and that discussion online and gain feedback. So across all of my clients, we're building in a series of within 3 sessions with certain touch points along the way that have the live WebEx component to it as well. And I really like that model and definitely advocate for having a live portion of it.
We've also talked about even sandwiching in, depending on how long the session is. So, I think in maybe some of your examples, Neil, where your sessions are actually over the course of months as opposed to weeks, it would be a really interesting way to continue to level set along the way as the meeting progresses. We've received feedback from advisors that they wish that there was a bit more live interaction, but with only a 2-week session, there doesn't leave a lot of room for too many live engagements along the way. So I think that would be a very beneficial model for companies to use if they're doing these sort of asynchronous sessions over an extended period of time, is to work in an additional 1 or 2 live sessions.
Yeah, I think companies are getting more, open to contracting HCPs in a way where they can allocate up to a certain number of hours and activities over the course of the year. It's easier than doing a handful of one-off contracts for individual activities, one by one, and sort of fighting that battle. So we've seen success with keeping the within 3 session open, and then as certain opportunities or business challenges come up, utilize that to go in and solve that problem. And often the clinical trial design is one example. Often you're tackling something that 2 weeks probably isn't going to be sufficient to maybe fully solve that particular problem. So the live also gives you the opportunity to, I think, counteract one challenge with live ad boards, which is often the HCPs will say, well, I'm not sure what you did with the information, or really didn't hear much back afterwards, but I might have seen you at a live Congress, later in the year, or I got invited to another ad board, a year later. But the live WebEx, even if you're doing it for, an hour, hour and a half, is just a chance to come back out of the within 3 session, kind of, synthesize, what we've heard so far, and then determine where we want to go with that information.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, that absolutely makes sense. And we're seeing, clients and agency partners becoming creative in how we're utilizing those models,
Yep.
and even seeing, we've had some commercial examples where people are having a live session and at the exact same time have our platform up on the screen to collect that data and feedback in real time.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah,
a lot
great.
of different functionality. You both mentioned, the multidisciplinary approach, and certainly a lot of disease states, it's imperative that you're reaching multiple target audiences. So I was wondering if you could comment about any of your clients that are able to expand their customer base, whether maybe they're reaching a secondary or tertiary audience they weren't before, or reaching KOLs they weren't previously, able to reach out to. I was wondering if you could comment on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Neil.
Yeah, glad to. In fact, I just had a good example of this over the last week. So I was able to conduct an ad board with nurse practitioners, physician assistants, nurses, office managers, really multidisciplinary group. What preceded that was with specialists that work in that particular therapeutic area. So I think it's allowing clients, because the overall lift, the overall budget spend, their time allocation and just the effort needed to implement an advisory board is not as significant virtually, but you can gain just as many insights to make that decision to expand audiences, and even beginning with having that multidisciplinary discussion where then you can break out into individual sessions based on your specialty and have that deeper dive. And we even had a board recently that included, I think the group was primary care physicians, 3 different specialties, a pharmacist, and we actually had a patient. And I don't think that ever would have happened in your traditional live advisory board format. I don't see that happening for so many reasons, but we're able to easily combine that into a really successful virtual discussion, and then go off and spend a couple of weeks, solving some problems and answering additional questions.
That's great.
Great. We've also seen some of our clients are finding that they're able to reach a higher level KOL that they haven't been able to reach before, and some of that is purely due to the fact that some of those top tier KOLs are so busy and they're sought after, and to get them into a live meeting when they have to travel for a couple of days, and it's a lot to ask. So this has made virtual engagements of all kinds have made some of those top tier KOLs just more accessible. And on the other side of things, some of our clients have been able to reach new markets that they haven't been able to enter into physically, so in person. And these are other countries. So in a country that they may not have been able to put on the books for 2020, either for budget reasons or regulatory reasons, they were able to access that market with a virtual platform, which is
nice.
pretty amazing.
Make a really good point about the, I think some of the smaller biotech, smaller companies, I think this brings them into play, utilizing the platform because of spend, and there's less of an ask in terms of KOL time commitment. So it definitely brings them into play. So I think, I'd encourage, clients to just, think creatively and strategically about, what are the business challenges you're trying to solve, because the platform, I think, provides you the opportunity, all the way from the clinical to the commercial side of the business to solve those. So it's just a matter of the sort of the creative application of the platform. The functionality is absolutely there in order to do that.
Yeah, and you bring up such a good point, because we've been in such reaction mode this year because of the pandemic, and I think this time of year and going into 2021 is such a really good time for our clients to really look at the opportunity that virtual engagements can bring to them. Who have they been unable to reach thus far with in person? Who have they just basically, not had the opportunity to work with for whatever the reason may be? And those smaller companies certainly the playing field is a bit more level set for them to be able to have access to KOLs at a much smaller budget and than they would have to otherwise, put up. So yeah, there's a lot of great opportunities on the forefront for our clients going into 2021 and beyond, because there's a question about yesterday's discussion was what's the new normal, and lots of people are wondering what the new normal is. And I think this is a really good time for people to consider what the world's going to look like going beyond the pandemic. And of course, we all want to be back together in person, but there's so many opportunities that people are really starting to grasp onto, and I think we've been moving that way for a while.
Yeah.
And the pandemic has been somewhat of a catalyst, for better or for worse, of course. But
yeah, and I don't think this virtual engagement is going to go away. I think it's probably taught us some good lessons that pharma is usually a little bit slow, picking up on compared to the tech world. But I like what you were saying about global connectivity. So for global teams, it's interesting to be able to think about advisors from very different geographies and time zones that make those live interactions a little bit more challenging. To still be able to engage in this platform. Maybe you can find the right time slot for an hour or two to kick things off, but then you can have experts from across the world utilizing this platform to work with each other, and previously without it, that maybe would happen at a big global congress, right, when everyone was together, or a one-off ad board every now and then. But this gives a chance for, I think, a little bit better global collaboration among experts.
Absolutely.
And I love the idea that we're able to level set for the small to mid-sized players in the market versus the larger pharma, which ultimately benefits us all to see molecules from these smaller companies that maybe never see the light of day, but now they can collect data and they can start to support their research and move greater down the funnel. So I think it's a really great opportunity for everyone involved to have an equal voice.
Absolutely.
Be really efficient with people's time. And one thing it does force you to do on the client side is be a little bit more ruthless in determining the amount of content that you need to stimulate the discussion that has to happen. In your live, full day ad board settings, you could be a little bit more, broad with how much you're presenting. But what I've liked is it's really cut down to, what's the essential information that we need to share, and what are the really prioritized questions that we have to get to that are most critical for the business. And at the end of the day, we're accomplishing exactly what needs to happen. And moving forward these business objectives for these clients without having to take 8 hours or a day and a half to do it.
Sure. No, absolutely. And I know we briefly touched upon, the patient side, but I would love to discuss that a little further, and really how this has impacted giving, patients a voice, and maybe how we're engaging with patients differently. Was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I think the point that Neil brought up a little earlier is that the patient ad boards can present so many challenges in terms of, depending on the patient population, but traveling is not always easy for patients, again, depending on the population, depending on the disease. A lot of times it involves also bringing a caregiver with them. So that's nearly doubling your budget because of that. And being together in a room can sometimes, it could go both ways, I believe. Patients either can be comforted by the fact that there's 4 walls around them and that everybody is in the same room, in a safe space. And in other situations, we've seen patients are kind of hesitant to share when they're actually face to face with the pharma company. So that can go both ways, but I think in general, our patients are finding that this is a very accessible, very comfortable and safe and secure way to engage with one another. We've had some very successful patient advisory boards over the past 6 to 8 months. And of course, again, bringing back into it the budget, it's certainly helpful to be able to do this on a much smaller scale in terms of budget.
Yeah. I like how you described it. I think it is a safe, kind of protected environment. Because if you think about the disconnect in some ways, right, for scheduling a patient ad board where maybe you're asking them to fly somewhere, obviously someone has some type of disease which you're interested in and gathering, feedback on, but you're asking them to travel, which just may not be feasible based on what that disease happens to be. And also, we've had really good ad boards with parents. So we do a lot of work in rare disease as well. So we think about parents of children that have a rare disease, and what's required if you were going to have a parent ad board. Either the child needs to travel with them, or they need to arrange for care at home. Both of those are not optimal options, I'm sure. So the ability to utilize this platform again in a very secure way, but in still a face-to-face and in a personalized fashion, I think opens up a lot of opportunities for patient and for parent and caregiver engagement that were so tough before.
Absolutely.
And are you finding, based on the feedback, or whether it is patient or HCPs, are there certain materials or whether it's educational or commercial or even from the clinical end that you're finding you were able to generate or improve upon based on these types of interactions?
Yeah, we definitely are. Christine, I want to hear your thoughts too. Yeah, there's almost always a component to these patient boards where you're asking, how can we better, educate everyone from, the physicians who may have, misdiagnosed you along the way. What do you feel they need to better understand? What did other patients like you need to better understand? What can we provide to you to help communicate, your disease and what you're going through to your family members, to your friends, to your your employer, depending on what the therapeutic area is. So I love the ability to share materials and gain feedback and recommendation around educational materials. It's almost always an important theme of these meetings.
Yeah, I agree. That and the within 3 platforms content collaboration feature is a really fantastic tool to be able to actually gain the insights directly on the piece that is in question, and that maybe it's been on the market and you want to figure out how to change it, or it hasn't come to market yet and you're still developing it and you want the feedback. So that's a great way to directly get the feedback that you're looking for. But I think that also brings up a really interesting point right now, is that we're finding ourselves in a place where we need to help our clients transform what we refer to as static content right now, which, our print materials. It's been quite some time since the field reps have been able to go out into a doctor's office and hand over materials for them to utilize. This is the opportunity where we can engage these advisors through either the platform or through a live virtual space, but to be able to actually tell them, hey, this is what we have for you already. It's static material, it's printed content. How can we make this work for you? How can we make this content that is consumable by you and your colleagues in a way that you're going to use it? Because I don't know about you guys, but how many restaurants have you gone to over the summer where you have to take your phone out and scan a QR code because people do, and maybe we should have been doing this years ago, because I feel like we've probably done a good thing for the environment here, not wasting paper napkins, paper menus, but in a similar way, this is an opportunity that we're in right now to engage HCPs in how to transform those static materials into something that is going to be much easier to consume virtually and otherwise.
Yeah, you make a good point about the annotation tool. I think any of our pharma biotech friends on here are probably familiar with Viva or similar tools for review. So I guess the key point there is you're able to kind of get into the detail. You're not just posting something for them to download and then asking them to simply have a chat around it. You know, they can go in and mark up that material and make comments, and that's really helpful. And they can have full transparency to everyone else's comments, so they really build on each other. You can see where there's consensus. And I like the ability also within the platform to provide video. So I've had a lot of success with clients doing, you know, short video introductions and overviews. It gives, again, a little bit different energy and personalization. You know, you're giving the brand, you know, a face. You're making that connection with your audience to reiterate, you know, thank you for being here. Here's what we're trying to accomplish. You know, here's what we're asking you to do, and it just gives, I think, another depth of content to that activity.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point with video too. You know, I think a part of the industry that's struggling right now is how to do product demonstrations virtually, and that's a whole other area that, you know, we haven't really touched on, but it's an opportunity for our clients to start looking at ways to get creative. You know, Neil, earlier you said this is time for our clients to really get out of their comfort zone and think creatively about how they can start to be innovative in this space. And you know, we've started creating videos for our clients that are actual either live or animated demonstrations of how their device works or how their product works, whether it's mechanism of action or a live demonstration. And then the beauty about this virtual engagement and these various virtual pieces is that they're able to live on. So, I mean, as I'm sure this particular discussion is being recorded, it is now an archive piece that can be used for multiple ways in the future for education and otherwise. And that's the beauty about all of these, you know, various engagements that we're finding ourselves in. Our clients are getting more bang for their buck because they're able to, you know, save this content for future use. And, you know, not every case is going to be usable in the future, but many, you know, webcasts are a great example that now you've got, instead of a presentation in a conference room to 100 people, you did a live webinar to 100 folks across the globe, but now you can take that and post it on an archive site where folks can log in and access that content indefinitely. It's a whole other, you know, tangent to go down, but
it's good. Yeah, I'll give you a couple of other creative examples. You know, I had one client who recorded their CEO for the, you know, for the welcome, you know, message. Probably we're not going to get the CEO to fly out to the live ad board, guys, right? Right. That's going to happen. Exactly. But hey, you know, you don't get what you don't ask for. All you're really asking for is, you know, 60, 90 second, you know, hello, and reiterating, you know, how important this is and how much, you know, in this case, that she appreciated everyone being there for the activity. Like that makes a really great statement to the advisors, right? So thinking creatively along those lines, and also we've got clients who are structuring out, picture having individual rooms or forums where an MSL has their own forum, and they can bring in their customers for scientific exchange, you know, virtually. Okay. Same on the sales side. It's been a little bit more customary so far this year on the MSL side, you know, but that's a utilization of the platform as well, where you're not able to get out for those, you know, face-to-face meetings like you would, you know, ideally want to, whether in their office or out at a congress. But I think that utility is still going to live on and is not just going to go away once everybody's out traveling again.
Absolutely. And another piece, when you were talking earlier about the content collaboration or the annotating tool on the Within3 platform, we've also found with some of our clients that their advisors are taking more ownership over the outcome of that document, whatever it is that they're collaborating on. For the exact point that you made, they're able to, instead of just giving a high-level review of the piece, like they would potentially in person as they kind of pass the brochure on the table, but they're able to really take ownership, and they're thinking a little bit more critically when they have the time to do it. You know, they're not on the spot. It's an asynchronous session, so they can do this when they have a few minutes to think, when they have a few quiet moments, and they're able to really think critically about their input and what they want to contribute to that piece. So their ability to take ownership, I think, is increased.
That's a good point. I'd also encourage clients to think about same as you would have a chairperson for an advisory board. As you creatively design various activities, if you're going to have one or two external moderators for various sessions. So we utilize that for both the large forum of 40 plus people. We utilize that for the clinical trial design, and engaging some of your really best experts who just sort of understand everything from the science to your strategy and are just you're so in sync with you about what you're trying to accomplish. You leverage their participation as moderators for the session as well. Contract them in that fashion, but have them help to sort of probe and make sure you're accomplishing all the objectives that you need to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and hopefully it's, also giving a voice to those that may be in a room. If you had a couple of dominant voices, everybody feels that ownership and, will want to participate equally. So those are definite great points.
Yeah.
We're speaking a lot about success, and I think from our angle, when we're looking at plans strategically and we're working through with our clients, I think success metrics are shifting a bit. Back in the days of a live event, we were looking at how many bodies were going to show up to that symposia. And so now we're looking at this, I think, in a different fashion, and certainly our budgets are shifting. And I was even thinking about timelines of timing. You might spend a month or two just planning the session and the logistics of it. So I was just curious, what are those conversations looking like? And perhaps for clients, how can they, when they're looking ahead to 2021, how can they either look at their budgets differently or their strategic plans in a different fashion?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting piece for our clients to start taking a look at, because budgets are always a hot topic, especially this time of year, Q3, Q4, and you can look at it sort of two ways. You can either host more advisory boards with a smaller budget per meeting, and you can gain more insights from more KOLs. So there's an increase in your just HCP engagement, or you can host the same number of advisory boards or meetings or webinars that you're planning to do, and then live, and then switch them to virtual and take what's left of your budget, which will probably be a pretty good chunk, and apply that in other areas of your company. Where do you need to start updating your materials? Where do you need to start transforming, static to digital content? It's a constantly changing industry, and there's a constant need for money to be put into research and development. And it's a really great way to just kind of look at, well, depending on where your business is at the moment, in a growth phase and otherwise. So you can really look at how to apply that budget savings in a number of different ways.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think efficiency of time and efficiency of budget is really important. You're going to have less of a transfer of value to the HCPs, which I think is meaningful. So you're not chewing up quite as much of that particular cap with the person as you might be with activities that are heavier from a logistics and out-of-pocket standpoint. I think two really important metrics, though, also in my mind, really straightforward are, did you accomplish your business objectives, and did the customer have a really good experience? Those are just two straightforward metrics. We accomplished our objectives, and it was on a shorter timeline, so therefore we delivered the insights, the recommendations back to the business quicker than we would have with a live ad board. We've often said over the past 5 years as we've utilized this platform more, but especially this year, is the traditional model doesn't quite move at the speed of the business. You need rapid insights. You need to move quickly, because once you get into the internal mechanics of churning something out that's going to hit an external customer, that doesn't always move quickly because of all the approval processes. So if your process to gain those insights or recommendations moves slow as well, you forget it. You're always going to be lagging behind. So, we're able to move quickly. We're able to accomplish the objectives and deliver those insights, recommendations, or that product that you're creating, that material back to the business. And did your customers have a good experience? So you're going to want to measure that and really understand what that looked like, and even have the sales rep or the MSL, do a follow-up and understand how that worked out for them, and if there's anything else that we can do to improve. But overall, the feedback that I've always seen has been very positive. I mean, they appreciate the efficiency, they appreciate the flexibility for their time, and I think it's been a very good experience for the HCPs that we've worked with for years.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the other thing too that's been sort of a hot topic this year especially has been the opinion that face-to-face engagement cannot be replaced by virtual engagement. And while I think most of us agree that that is true, there is a level of customer satisfaction of not having to travel, still contributing and still being a part of the conversation. But there is a way for the clients or the customers to be able to find a satisfactory experience without having to be in person. And I think that's what you just described. And we've talked a lot about at our company about just sort of the Zoom fatigue, and earlier today we were talking about how it interacting in this sort of flat way is not the same. Obviously, it's not the same as being in person with one another. But there are so many other benefits that maybe they outweigh, maybe they don't, maybe it's, who knows. I'm sure there's a study going on somewhere for that. But in the meantime, I think we can really start to look at, no, it's not the same as being face to face, but there are plenty of benefits that can that can be put into place.
Yeah, I think it's flipped a bit. It used to be that virtual would supplement live. I think as we move forward, I think live will help to supplement virtual, and we'll find the right placement for those live engagements because of what's needed in order to make that happen.
Yeah, and while it's been a necessity, there's no doubt it's been virtual engagements have been a fantastic way to do business this year. And as we grow out of the pandemic at some point, and it's no longer a necessity, I think that we're still going to find, just like you said, there's going to be a place for live and a place for virtual.
Yeah, and there used to be this fear, and I mean, for me, this even goes back to one of the case studies I was talking about, where we had to shift really, the week of, actually within a few days, this large, 40-person meeting over to virtual. And there's a concern: is everyone going to be able to get on? Will everyone be able to turn on their webcams? And that was very, very stressful. We were able to execute it, beautifully. And I found this year that that learning curve is gone. There should not be any concern whatsoever about, is the technology going to work? Are people going to be able to get on and access it? That should not be a barrier, for anybody. The platform is very intuitive. Your traditional, WebEx type platforms are intuitive. Everyone has been able to get on and knows how to use this now. So that is not a barrier. Whereas in years past, perhaps people would make one.
And just like in-person meetings, those blips are the exception, not the rule. So there's always going to be travel delays. There's always going to be weather in Chicago. There's always things that will happen that you have to just sort of work in. And then there'll always be the serendipitous moments, live and virtual as well. So they're not the same, but both methods have their ups and downs. Technology is not perfect. But neither is traveling to a hotel in winter.
At the end of the day, do you have the right people on there, gathered for your meeting? Are you using really effective content in order to stimulate, the discussion? Are you asking really thoughtful, strategic questions that are going to solve, business issues and answer, opportunities for your business? If so, you're set. The technology is there, and the technology is going to work really successfully. Just like a live meeting, if you're if the content isn't really strong and the questions aren't so intriguing to your advisors, then it's not going to be a positive experience. That has nothing to do with the platform. So I'll come back to the fundamentals of really strong scientific communication having to be a backbone to make the platform successful.
And to your earlier point, the technology industry is way ahead of the curve in many cases, and that's where our clients in the pharma and med device industry, they can be a little bit more comforted by the fact that the technology industry is on par right now. And for this, one of the few industries that was ready for a pandemic was the technology industry.
Sure.
It's so true.
Yeah.
Well, I want to leave enough time. I do know we have a couple of questions from some of the participants. So I just want to pull some of these up. So we have a question about, for materials. To develop the materials, do you consider HCP's journeys for the engagement and increase adoption from them?
I missed the second half of that. Sorry, you cut out a little bit.
Yeah, no problem. It says to develop the materials, do you consider HCP journeys for the engagement and increase adoptions from them?
Any thoughts on that one, Christine?
Yeah, so I'm not sure I totally understand the question. HCP journeys in the adoption of the materials?
I think so. And then perhaps, let's see. Yeah, they just mentioned about the HCP's journey in terms of the engagement, and I guess maybe the process of then going towards the materials, maybe the next step from the engagement.
Yeah, well, I mean, in general, the HCP journey in terms of a customer engaging with them, it's actually been a little bit easier, in my opinion, to from start to finish in terms of hosting a meeting or an ad board. We've done it a couple of different ways. We usually send out some pre-read materials for meetings via email, a variety of articles, maybe videos. We now put those on the Within 3 platform and have a pre-meeting session. So that's where they can review all those resources, and it's in a place where they can go back to and find them. They don't have to go back and look through their emails and, that attachment didn't open, things like that. So that's been an easy solution. In other ways where we've been using just live virtual meetings without the asynchronous platform, we've been actually still printing our materials, but we ship them out to the customers' homes. We even, in some cases, send out custom snack boxes for, like, if it's going to be a 3, 4, 5 hour live virtual meeting, they'll get their delivery the morning of, and it's just a nice way for our customer or for our clients to have that extra touch point with their advisors. I'm not sure if that totally answered that question.
I can give you my point of view based on how I interpret it. When I hear journey, often I think of a patient journey.
Right, that's what I think.
But I think for the HCP journey, what that makes me think of is, are you sharing the big picture with them, in advance? So materials development, for example, say that they're going to create a disease education slide deck. I think it's important to show them the series of touch points that we're going to have. So what we'll often lay out is, we're starting, today with a WebEx meeting. We're going to have 2 weeks working on the slide deck. We're going to have another WebEx meeting, ratify some of the feedback. Then we're going to go into another Within 3 session for a couple of weeks. Come out and share with you, the final slide deck, via WebEx at that point. And perhaps some of these HCPs are then going to be those that are presenting these slides, whether it's at a medical symposium at congresses or locally within the region. So I think for that journey, really like to share with them the big picture and all the touch points in advance, so they can see, where we're starting and what the journey is going to be and what the kind of the end goal is.
Yep, absolutely.
That's great.
Communication's key, always key with HCPs.
And otherwise, because we spend so much time talking about this, within the walls of the virtual walls of the, agency. client relationship. We maybe take for granted sometimes that the experts that we have on there aren't privy to all those conversations. We forget a little bit to sort of share with them, so it doesn't feel like a one-off type of type of interaction.
Right, exactly.
Sure, that's great. That's great. We have two other questions. I'm going to pair them together because they deal with contracting and compliance. And so happy to have you both answer. I can weigh in as well. But they'd like to know, how do you monitor the longer discussion forums to ensure the topics are compliant while also, monitoring the amount of time that HCPs are participating? So I know you both touched upon this a little bit earlier in the discussion, but perhaps you could share, what your best practices have been in managing this with clients and how much time to allocate.
Yeah, so we typically allocate about 4 hours for a 2-week session for an HCP. So in that session, that online asynchronous session may have around 20 questions. So over the course of a couple weeks, we'll release a few questions at a time in an effort to have the advisors come back to the platform, continue engaging with one another, not just with answering the questions that we've posed, but also just to discuss back and forth ideas with one another. So in that type of format, we usually estimate about 4 hours for an advisor, and then about 10 hours for a moderator, for an HCP moderator, because in that type of model, we're really engaging them up front in how the flow of the meeting, how the flow of the discussion will go, and what the content looks like. And in some cases, they're even contributing some content. In terms of regulatory or compliance, we do provide all of our discussion questions up front for a compliance review with our clients to make sure that they're in line with what the discussion, where the discussion is headed. Can't always control, obviously, where a discussion will go, but we certainly can get their approval on where it's going to start. Neil, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's around how many hours we usually allocate as well. I think it's important in those compliance conversations, and then in the contracting, to set a cap on the number of hours. So when you look at the activity in totality, again, try to contract all of those touch points that you're planning to have in, from start to finish in this particular engagement, and cap it so that you don't hear back from an HCP who goes, well, I spent 12 hours, in the platform, answer questions. You go, well, we don't feel comfortable compensating you for 12 hours. So you cap it out. We really don't feel compelled to try to monitor within the platform, because people are going to do some work and research, outside of it as well. You may be asking questions where someone will say, well, I read these few articles and I was on PubMed and I had to go on clinicaltrials.gov and I was looking up this information in order to come back into the session and provide my thoughts and answer questions. So I think from a contracting standpoint, just cap it at a reasonable number of hours, a number of hours not to exceed, and you will generally be good. And my other thought from a compliance standpoint as well, I don't know if this was directly part of the question, but I think it's important to communicate is, this may be newer to some of your compliance colleagues, and their frame of reference is often going to be live advisory board type meetings that are capped at 12 people normally at most companies, being for whatever reason that arbitrary acceptable number of not to exceed. Otherwise, you have to justify in some additional way. So try to contextualize these virtual engagements as multiple live advisory boards. If you need to, if you're going down that route from a design standpoint, we're going to have multiple specialties represented in here, and you can say, well, this would normally be 2 or 3 live advisory board meetings, held for a full day, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to combine this into into one virtual session, for efficiencies, and we're going to break them out and separate the feedback out by specialty. So those having those consults are important upfront in those conversations with your compliance colleagues, for sure.
Yeah. And I think you brought up a good point too. We do the same. We cap the hours for the contracts, but I think it's the metrics that the Within 3 platform has that they can report out on, with the number of hours and down to the minute of how much time each advisor actually spent in the platform, is very useful for backup. But we don't use those metrics as how do you pay your advisors, because there's there's some folks that are going to spend more time than others for various reasons, and they may be logged in while they're researching on PubMed, or they may be logged in while they left the office. So there's always reasons, why maybe the number may not be exact. But the nice part about it is that it gives you a really good picture of what the average looks like and the average amount of time that the advisors spent. And we've always been satisfied after the fact, when we look at the numbers, that it always does sort of average out around that 4-hour mark, which is great. And again, there may be some advisors that spend 30, 45 minutes and others that spend 6. So it'll even itself out.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure. Well, we have a few minutes left. One of the last questions, and I'd like to touch upon it, is how do you handle the effects of digital fatigue, which I know we've talked a little bit about, and certainly we spoke about, the hybrid approach. And, one comment I would just like to make as marketers, as anybody, that's listening in on the agency side or even client, is to consider all the virtual tools that you have and to understand how to use them. So is a Zoom interaction appropriate, or is more of a webinar type setup like we have here today, where it might be a more didactic presentation where you do have limited Q&A, to really understand the functionality is really key. So I don't know what your thoughts are, but I just want to mention that's really critical as you are planning out your strategic communication plans, is to consider what you have. And then from an overtime session, certainly one of the goals is to combat that digital fatigue and give people time.
Well, I think one of the ways to combat it is to make sure that within your market, there isn't already too much saturation in terms of educational programs, so webinars, lectures, things like that, because that's where you're going to not find the numbers that you're looking for in terms of an audience. But the more interactive that you're, if it's a presentation as opposed to an advisory board, the more audience interaction that you have, the more engagement you can get through polling, audience polling, things like that. That's going to keep their interest, keep their engagement, because that is where you start to lose folks, in this type of digital fatigue. And then with the live meetings, our advice that we give to our clients all the time is do not exceed 3.5 hours for a live meeting, because in the beginning of the pandemic, we'll go back to that pandemic, in the beginning it was like, all right, let's hold a 6-hour live virtual ad board, and it probably, we had to do a lot of transitioning at the last minute, such as you did, Neil. Not quite a big program as that 40-person ad board, but lots of transition at the last minute. So we kind of had to keep the agenda the same because we needed to accomplish the same objectives. But with enough planning, you can accomplish the objectives that you need in a more compressed amount of time. And that's where you're going to be able to help on the Zoom fatigue or the digital fatigue that you're talking about, is to make sure that people don't have to sit in front of a computer and be on camera in that awkward sort of, self-reflection way for more than 3 hours, 3.5-ish.
Yeah, exactly. And just really quickly on that point, I think the same way when we were all in live in-person meetings, just be efficient, right? If we've all been to hour-long meetings, we're exactly sure of the objective, and it wasn't so well organized, and not so much was accomplished, right? So if you can accomplish something in a shorter amount of time, just be really, really focused and just utilize your tools effectively, for that reason. Absolutely. Don't just default to an hour-long meeting, for example, over Zoom.
Right, exactly.
That's great. No, totally agree. Well, looks like we are at time. So don't want to keep anybody too much longer. I can't thank you both enough for joining today and providing your insights. I'm sure this was incredibly helpful and valuable to those that joined us today. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having us, Angela. This is a great experience.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks, Neil.
Thank you everyone for joining us. Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, you too.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, take care.